I asked Jesus a question I didn't expect him to answer. It happened the night my best friend, the kindest, most faithful man I knew, was wheeled into a hospital bed with something they couldn't fix. I stared at his pale face, barely conscious, and I couldn't stop the words from rising. Why do the ones who love you the most suffer the hardest? I didn't yell it. I barely whispered, but heaven heard it anyway, and the answer I received changed me forever. The hospital lights buzzed overhead, cold and fluorescent, casting a pale tint over everything that used to feel alive. I sat in the corner of the room, watching the rise and fall of Eli's chest beneath a tangle of wires and monitors. He was the kind of man people rarely noticed because he never asked to be noticed. Always the first to pray, the last to speak, the one who gave quietly, forgave quickly, and lived as if the world wasn't watching because he believed heaven was. We grew up together, but somewhere along the way, he'd become better than me. Not louder, not richer, just better. So when the diagnosis came, rare, fast-moving, untreatable, it felt like someone had robbed the world of something pure. And I couldn't understand it. I watched him sleep, face pale, lips cracked, still clutching a worn wooden cross in one hand like he knew it mattered more than the machines. Nurses came in and out, checking numbers, whispering codes, but it all blurred together. I wasn't angry, just hollow. As if something I never named had cracked open. I stepped outside into the bitter night air. The wind cut through my jacket, and I looked up at the dark sky where no stars were showing. I didn't know if I was praying or just thinking out loud when I whispered, "God, why him? Why do you let the ones who love you the most carry the heaviest pain?" My breath fogged in the cold. No voice answered. No thunder rolled. Just silence. But deep in that silence, something stirred. Not around me, in me. Like my soul had been touched without permission. I returned to the room. Eli was still asleep, face peaceful like he knew something I didn't. I sat down again, but I didn't feel alone anymore. Something invisible had taken its seat beside me, and though no words were spoken, I felt it clearly. My question hadn't vanished. It had been heard, and the one who heard it was already preparing to answer. I barely slept that night. The hospital couch was stiff, and the air conditioning kept rattling like it was gasping for air. But that wasn't what kept me awake. It was the question. It kept echoing in my chest like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. Why do good people suffer? Why Eli? Why does heaven stay quiet when the kindest souls are being crushed? I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, trying to reason with God in my head, justifying things I didn't believe, repeating things I'd heard in sermons, but none of it held up. Nothing settled. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and walked outside. The parking lot was empty, painted silver by the moon. I stood under a flickering streetlight, arms folded, and finally said it out loud. "Are you even listening?" My voice cracked when I said it. I didn't mean it as an accusation. It came out like a child asking if his father had forgotten him. And that's when it happened. The wind shifted. It wasn't strong, but it was different. A warmth brushed against the cold. Not physical warmth. It was like the air itself had been woven with something alive. I turned, expecting to see someone nearby, but the lot was empty. Then, behind me, the hospital lights flickered, one by one, down the hallway, like something was moving, passing through. I walked back inside, slowly, uneasy but calm, like something sacred was happening, and I didn't want to disturb it. When I opened the door to Eli's room, it was still, so still it felt like time had paused. But the air was thick now, like a presence filled the corners. I sat down in the chair again and closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to surrender. And then I heard him. Not with my ears, But so clearly it silenced every other thought. A voice deeper than sound, gentle but absolute. He said only one thing. You are not asking for answers. You are asking for me. I opened my eyes and felt like the whole room had changed. The walls looked the same. The monitor still blinked. Eli still slept. But something eternal had cracked through the ordinary. I didn't understand the words yet, but I knew they were true. I wasn't just searching for an explanation, I was aching for presence, for someone. I leaned back and exhaled for the first time in hours. Not because I had peace, but because I knew peace was coming. Slowly, unexpectedly, like a voice carried on wind. I don't know when I fell asleep. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something more. But when I opened my eyes, the room didn't feel like a hospital anymore. Everything looked the same, the monitor lights, the hum of machines, the scent of antiseptic still clinging to the air, but something had shifted beneath the surface. It was as if the ground I'd been standing on had quietly been replaced. The atmosphere was impossibly still, not heavy, holy. My breath slowed without effort. The world around me held its breath too. And then, without warning, the light changed. It wasn't sudden or theatrical. It was quiet, like morning light slowly rising where there had only been night. A soft glow began to fill the room from no visible source, warm and golden, but without casting shadows. I looked toward the foot of Eli's bed, and that's when I saw him. He didn't walk in. He didn't descend. He was simply there, standing, radiant, real. Not a dream, not a symbol, not a presence. I had to imagine. Jesus. I didn't need to ask who he was. The recognition hit so deep that my soul responded before my mind could even catch up. He wore no crown, no robe of gold, no display of power. Just simple linen, clean, white, and glowing faintly with light that seemed to come from within. His eyes met mine, and I forgot how to breathe. There was no judgment in them, no distance, just overwhelming love. The kind that sees through you without hurting you. The kind that exposes you without shaming you. The kind that makes you want to cry and laugh at the same time because you know you're home. He said nothing at first. He didn't need to. His gaze was enough to silence every doubt I had ever carried. Then he nodded softly, like he already knew why I had been asking, why I had been breaking. You asked me something, he said. His voice was calm and steady, but it wasn't just sound, it echoed through my chest like it belonged there. And I have come to answer you, but not with words alone. I wanted to fall to my knees, but my body wouldn't move. I could only watch, stunned and wide awake, as he stepped forward and gently placed his hand on Eli's blanket. This story, he said, looking down at my friend with deep tenderness, is part of something far greater than you've imagined. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat locked, and tears spilled without my permission. The King of Heaven was in a hospital room, and he wasn't just answering a question. He was answering me. He turned and looked at me again, and in that single glance, I felt everything I'd ever buried come rushing to the surface. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was exposure without pain, like being seen for the first time in my life and still being fully loved. His eyes held galaxies of sorrow and joy, eternity and empathy. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. Somehow, I knew he had seen every moment of my life. Not just the ones I showed others, the real ones. The prayers whispered in silence. The doubts I never admitted. The nights I screamed into pillows just to survive the morning. All of it. And still, he stayed. Come, he said. And though his lips barely moved, the word rang like a bell in my chest. The moment he spoke, the walls of the hospital room began to dissolve. The machines faded. The floor beneath my feet melted into light. We weren't walking, but we were moving. It felt like time had released its grip. In a blink, we stood in a vast open field surrounded by a golden mist. The air was thick with peace, but not silence. There was music, faint and woven into everything, as if creation itself was humming a memory of heaven. Jesus turned toward me again. "You want to understand why the good suffer," he said gently. "But the truth is deeper than explanation. You are not asking for knowledge. You are asking for my heart." I swallowed hard. The weight of his words settled inside me like seeds. I wanted to ask more, to press him for answers, to wrestle with the theology I had built over the years. But nothing in me could speak. Not yet. He stepped closer and pointed to something just ahead. Through the mist, I could make out faint shapes, figures, people. They weren't walking or standing. They were kneeling, some with hands raised, some with faces buried in the grass, others curled in the fetal position, weeping. A holy silence surrounded them, like this space had been carved out just for their pain. "This," Jesus said, "is the valley of the brokenhearted, the place I walk daily." I looked again, and my throat closed. They weren't strangers. I recognized some. A girl from my childhood who was always smiling, even when bruises lined her arms. A pastor's wife who disappeared after her miscarriage. A friend who used to pray for me when I didn't deserve it. All of them here, still weeping, still worshiping. "These are the ones who never stopped loving," he said, "even when it cost them everything. They do not know it, but they carry more of me than many who preach about me." I blinked back tears. Jesus wasn't just showing me pain. He was showing me the people who live closest to his heart, and the answer I had feared was beginning to reveal something far more beautiful than I ever expected. We walked deeper into the valley, though our feet never touched the ground. The golden mist began to clear, revealing more of the people scattered across the field. Some lay prostrate, unmoving. Others trembled as they cried, their hands clutching the air like they were searching for something they couldn't name. I felt a heaviness settle over me. Not oppressive, but sacred. The kind of weight you feel at a funeral where love is too big for words. I turned to Jesus. His face was set, not in sadness, but in holy attention. Like every cry was a note in a melody he never stopped listening to. He raised his hand, and the entire valley seemed to pause. Then, with one finger, he touched the ground. The earth beneath us rippled, and suddenly, I could see their stories. Not just the suffering, but the reasons behind it. A woman sobbing in the grass became a vision of her past, holding her son's tiny shoes the night he died in his sleep. A man curled into himself was once a boy beaten for believing in Jesus. Another, an old woman whispering prayers into the dirt, had been forgotten by every living relative. Every one of them had chosen love again and again, even when love never seemed to choose them back. "The world calls them weak," Jesus said, "but in heaven, these are heroes." I knelt beside a man whose hands were shaking. I recognized him. Years ago, he had comforted me when my mother passed. I had no idea he'd lost his wife that same week. He never told me. He had simply served, quietly, completely. "Why are they here?" I asked, my voice cracking. Jesus looked at me, and there was a softness in his eyes that made me want to weep. Because they never stopped trusting me, even when they could not trace me. They didn't understand why, but they stayed. And every tear they cried became a seed. He pointed to the ground, and as I looked, I saw small golden shoots rising from the earth. One by one, they bloomed. Not flowers, crowns. Glorious, radiant crowns that pulsed with light. Their pain was not buried. It was planted, he said. and what grows from it will be eternal. The crowns rose higher, suspended above each person, waiting for a time not yet fulfilled. I couldn't speak. My chest felt like it was caving in and opening at the same time. The valley was not a place of punishment. It was a garden of glory. These were not forgotten souls. They were heaven's favorites, chosen not because they were strong, but because they were willing to carry the weight of love when love felt like loss. And for the first time in my life, I realized something that silenced me completely. God does not waste pain. Not a single tear. Jesus walked ahead of me through the valley. And with every step, the air seemed to hum louder, like heaven was whispering through the wind. The ground beneath us began to shift, becoming smoother, brighter, like a path made of light. In the distance, I saw something rising tall, wide, glowing like molten gold. It wasn't a building. It was a book, a living book. Its pages towered higher than trees, and each one shimmered with names. As we approached, I could hear something faint words being spoken, like prayers returning from the deep. "What is this?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Jesus placed his hand over his heart and said, "The book of the broken. Every name written here belongs to someone whose suffering was carried in silence. No platform, no applause, only me." I stared at the pages, and as they turned, I saw not only names, but moments, snapshots of lives the world had overlooked. A mother who fed her children scraps while going hungry herself. A janitor who spent his nights interceding for strangers he passed at work. A young girl who forgave the man who ruined her childhood. The names were engraved in light, not ink, and beside each one, there was a phrase not describing their pain, but their choice. She chose to love again. He stayed when it cost everything. She blessed instead of cursed. They are not remembered for how they were wounded, Jesus said, but for how they responded. I stood still, watching page after page turn like waves in the ocean, each one bearing witness to pain the world never rewarded. "Why don't we know about them?" I asked. "Why doesn't the church celebrate these stories?" Jesus looked at me gently. "Because these lives were never meant to be trophies. They are treasures, hidden, like pearls in deep waters. The world looks for greatness in the spotlight. I look for greatness in the shadows." I felt my chest tighten. All the times I thought my struggles meant I had failed God, all the nights I cried and felt forgotten, they were seen. Not only seen, but documented, honored. I reached out and touched one of the glowing names. It pulsed under my fingertips, like a heartbeat. I didn't know the person, but I felt their story. It was sacred. The book turned another page, and this time I saw someone I knew. My mother. Her name shimmered brighter than the rest. I dropped to my knees. "She never thought she was holy," I whispered. Jesus knelt beside me, hand on my shoulder, "Because the holiest ones never do, but heaven knows them well." The book began to close slowly, and the light that had surrounded it spread outward like a breath. Every hidden life, every private heartbreak, every act of quiet obedience, it was all remembered. Not one name had been lost. Not one tear had gone unnoticed. In a world obsessed with noise, God had kept a library of the quiet faithful, and it was more beautiful than I could bear. As the book faded into light, the mist around us shifted again. The ground beneath my feet lifted gently, and before I could ask where we were going, the valley melted away. A rush of golden wind swept around us, and the air grew warmer, more radiant. Then the light broke, and we were standing in a vast chamber I cannot fully describe. It was a throne room, but not like the ones in stories. There were no marble pillars or jeweled walls. It was made of something eternal. The walls pulsed with a soft glow, Like the heartbeat of heaven itself, the atmosphere trembled with awe. And in the center of it all stood a throne, simple, glorious, and alive. Around it, a long line of people waited. They were not proud. They were not loud. They were quiet souls. Eyes lowered, hands open. Some were old, some looked like children, and many bore signs of suffering, limps, scars, bent backs. But every one of them radiated peace. Who are they? I asked. My voice sounded so small here. Jesus smiled as he looked at them. These are the ones who never stopped trusting me, the ones who carried their cross in silence. The world never applauded them, but heaven has prepared a crown for each. As I watched, one by one, they stepped forward. The king, the same Jesus beside me now, sat on the throne. His face was the same, but his presence was overwhelming. Like thunder wrapped in light, he would look at each person, speak something only they could hear, and then lift a crown from the air crafted from their tears, their prayers, their surrender, and place it on their head. The crowns weren't made of gold, they were made of glory. Some glowed like fire, others sparkled like galaxies, each one unique, each one undeserved. I looked at a young woman as she stepped forward. Her arms were thin. Her eyes were soft. I could sense she had suffered deeply. Jesus rose from the throne to meet her. He didn't place the crown on her. He knelt and offered it in his hands. She collapsed into tears, and he caught her like a father would catch his child. These are the ones the earth forgot, he said to me, his voice thick with love. But they are royalty in my kingdom, because they chose me when they had nothing left. When it hurt, when it cost, when no one else saw. I turned away, eyes full of tears. The world honors strength. God crowns surrender. No fame, no applause, just obedience in the dark. I felt a trembling in my soul, like something deep inside me was breaking and being rebuilt at the same time. And I knew then, when the pain feels hidden, when the sacrifice feels small, when the world gives you nothing in return, that is when heaven sees most clearly. The throne room faded, but the sound remained, a low, steady vibration, like distant thunder wrapped in music. We were moving again, lifted on light, swept through something I cannot name. The golden air shifted to deep blues and silvers, and when the ground returned beneath my feet, I found myself standing on the edge of a vast cliff that overlooked a great expanse. The air was still, but charged. Below us, valleys and rivers stretched for what looked like forever. But what captured my attention was not the landscape, it was the sound. Cries, echoes, shouts of anguish, of grief, of loss. But woven through them was something else, something beautiful. Notes like song. I looked at Jesus, unsure of what I was hearing. "What is this place?" I asked. He walked to the edge of the cliff and motioned for me to follow. "This is the mountain of echoes," he said. "Every cry ever uttered in pain reaches here. Nothing is lost. Not a whisper, not a scream, not a breathless sob. The earth may forget them, but heaven never does." I listened harder. At first it felt overwhelming. But the longer I stood, the more I began to hear the harmony behind the horror. Somehow, suffering had become symphony. "Pain releases sound," Jesus said softly. "And when it is offered to me, it becomes praise whether they know it or not." I could barely hold myself upright. The thought that my own cries I had cursed, silenced, or buried, were part of this, it undid me. "But how?" I asked, tears already spilling. "How can pain become praise when it feels like betrayal?" Jesus turned toward me, his eyes shimmering. "Because pain is honest, and I never reject the honest heart, even when it's angry, even when it's broken. Especially then." He raised his hand, and instantly I heard one voice rise above the rest. A scream I remembered as my own. The night I lost someone. The night I believed God had abandoned me. The cry had left my mouth in agony. But here on this mountain it echoed like a violin string trembling in reverence. Holy, I dropped to my knees. I didn't know. I whispered. I didn't know, you kept it. He knelt beside me and placed a hand on my back. You don't have to understand everything to be held. You only have to bring it to me. The wind picked up, lifting the sounds higher, and suddenly the sky above us opened with light. The cries rose into it, not erased, not silenced but transformed. I looked up and saw stars forming from the echoes. Not metaphor, reality, suffering, turned into light. And in that moment, I realized something that shattered me in the best way possible. Heaven does not cancel our pain. It converts it. The light above us dimmed gently, not like a bulb being turned off, but like the final note of a song fading into silence. The echoes quieted, the sky closed, the wind settled. I stood next to Jesus on that mountaintop. Overwhelmed, hollowed out, full in a way that didn't make sense. And then he spoke again, softer this time. You've seen their pain, he said. Now it's time to see yours. Before I could respond, everything around us shifted again. The stars melted into shadows, and suddenly we were standing in a place I hadn't thought about in years. A hallway, familiar. My hallway. The night I collapsed in grief after the call that changed everything. The night I screamed into the carpet, begging God to take the pain away, to do something, anything. I watched it happen like I was outside of myself, my younger self, curled on the floor, fists clenched, breathing ragged. The lights were off. The world felt gone. I remember that night like it never left me. I had begged for a sign, for comfort, for God to just say something. And I thought he hadn't. I thought he let me suffer alone. Until now. Jesus stepped forward and touched the scene, and the moment rewound. Just a few seconds. And then, like a curtain was pulled back, I saw what I had never seen. Angels, kneeling around me, covering me. One at my feet, one by my head, one with hands over my ears, shielding me from lies I didn't even know were whispering. I gasped. They were there? Jesus nodded. You only saw the wound. I saw what it replaced. I looked at him. Undone. Why didn't you let me feel it? He paused, then answered with more kindness than I could carry. Because you needed to choose love even when you couldn't feel it. That kind of love becomes unshakable. And I was building something eternal in you. The younger me was still sobbing in the memory. But I now saw how heaven had surrounded me when I thought I'd been abandoned. What I had mistaken for silence had been shelter. What I had thought was absence was actually presence in its most protective form. Jesus stepped back and let the scene fade. We stood again in the stillness. You won't always see what I shielded you from, he said. But one day you'll thank me for the things I didn't allow, even if they looked like loss. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My breath caught, and all I could do was let the tears come freely. Pain hadn't been proof of his absence. It had been proof of his mercy. And now, for the first time in my life, I no longer wanted to erase the moments that broke me, because they had been guarded. And even when I had doubted him, the world around us shifted again, but slower this time, like a deep breath being exhaled by heaven itself. The shadows peeled away, and we found ourselves in a small, open field. Wildflowers moved gently in the breeze, and golden light washed the hills. It felt peaceful, but not empty. There was something holy here, like the earth itself remembered what had happened upon it. Jesus walked to the center of the field and knelt, running his hand along the tall grass. Then he looked at me. "You've seen how pain is remembered. Now you'll see why it is allowed." My stomach tightened. This was the part I had never dared to ask. Why would a good God allow those who love him the most to suffer the deepest wounds? I wanted the question answered, but part of me didn't want to know. He rose and pointed to a nearby tree, bent from storms but still bearing fruit. "There is a kind of goodness the world celebrates," he said. "One that is sweet, convenient, safe, but the goodness that transforms darkness, that shakes hell, and awakens hearts, that kind is forged in fire." He walked closer and continued. "When a person who could curse chooses to bless, when someone who could grow bitter chooses to forgive, when a soul that has been crushed still chooses to love, that goodness becomes a weapon against evil." I felt something shift in me. He wasn't glorifying pain. He was revealing its power. "So suffering is the price of being good?" I asked. "No," he said gently. "Suffering is the cost of carrying light. The more light you carry, the more darkness you push back, and darkness does not surrender without a fight." I looked around the field again. It looked calm, but I could feel its history. Like battles had once raged here. Like tears had watered this very soil. Jesus placed his hand over his heart. "You asked why the good suffer. It's because they're strong enough to bear what others cannot, and because they're close enough to me to carry what is sacred." His eyes softened. "You are not punished for being good. You are trusted with pain because your soul has room for glory." I didn't know what to say. The air around us was alive with something I couldn't describe. A reverence, a weight. And suddenly I saw it, flashes of people I knew, people who had suffered deeply but never let go of love. Their lives had not been wasted. They had been used as living swords, carving light into the thickest shadows. The good suffer, not because God has forsaken them, but because they are carrying something eternal, and the scars they bear will one day shine brighter than any crown. We stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. The wind moved gently through the grass, and every sound felt intentional, as if even the breeze was praying. I turned to Jesus, with something burning in my chest. I had seen so much crowns for the broken, songs made from sorrow, angels guarding wounds I thought were abandoned. But one question still lingered, heavier than the rest. Why doesn't everyone get healed? My voice cracked as I said it. Some pray with everything they have, and they still die. Some believe until their last breath, and the miracle never comes. His face didn't change. He didn't look away. He didn't correct me. He just let the weight of the question settle between us. Then, slowly, he sat down on the grass and motioned for me to sit with him. I did. And when I looked at him again, his eyes were full of tears. Real tears. They fell down his cheeks without shame. "You're not the first to ask," he said quietly. "And you won't be the last." I could feel my own tears coming again. "So what do I tell them?" I asked. "What do I tell the mother who buried her child? The man who believed and still bled? The one who asked for healing and only got silence?" He looked up at the sky and closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked straight into mine. "Tell them I was with them the whole time. Tell them I wept when they wept. Tell them that healing is not always of the body, but I never let suffering go unanswered. Redemption is not always seen on earth, but nothing righteous is ever lost." I wanted to believe him. I did, but a part of me still ached. "But why the silence?" I asked. "Why does it feel like you disappear when we need you the most?" He reached out and touched my chest, right over my heart. "Because I live here, not out there. When everything else falls silent, that is where you'll hear me clearest." The wind passed through the field again, warmer now, and I understood something I never had before. We cry out for rescue, but He often sends presence. We long for miracles, but He offers Himself. And sometimes the most divine answer is not escape, but companionship. A Savior who chooses to sit in the ashes with you, not because He cannot stop the fire, but because He knows what the fire will become. He stood again and looked out over the horizon. Not every story ends the way you prayed, but every story, surrendered to me, ends in glory. And with that, the last piece of my question broke, and the silence finally became enough. The next thing I knew, I was back in the hospital room. The golden fields, the mountain of echoes, the throne room of crowns, they were all gone. But they weren't lost. They had become part of me. The faint beep of the heart monitor filled the air again, steady and soft. Eli was still asleep, his face calm, his hand still loosely gripping the little wooden cross. Nothing in the room had changed. Not the machines, not the sterile light, not the quiet hum of night, and yet everything had changed. I sat in the same chair, but I no longer carried the weight of unanswered questions. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had finally seen the one who did. My heart felt raw, tender in a way I couldn't explain, like it had been broken and rebuilt with threads of heaven. I looked at Eli's face, pale, peaceful, unchanged, and suddenly I didn't feel the need to beg for healing. I would still ask. I would still hope. But I no longer feared the silence. I knew what lived inside it now. I reached out and placed my hand gently on his arm. "You're not alone," I whispered. "You never were." I thought about the Book of the Broken, about the people who carried light in silence, who wore crowns the world would never see. I thought about the mountain, where every cry became a song, about the angels who guard our pain in secret, about the Savior who sits in ashes rather than escape them. And I thought about the tree in the field, the one that still bore fruit, bent but not broken. That tree was Eli. It was my mother. It was every soul who ever asked why and still chose to stay. For the first time, I didn't need a miracle to believe God was good. I had seen where suffering goes. I had seen what He does with it. And now I understood. God doesn't only walk on water. He walks through hospital rooms and bedrooms and dark valleys. He walks into grief, into chemo, into heartache, and sits down beside us without flinching. He doesn't always fix it the way we want, but He never wastes a single moment of it. That realization settled in my bones like warmth returning after a long cold night. Eli stirred slightly in his bed, his brow twitching before relaxing again. I smiled, not because I knew what would happen, but because I knew who would be with us, no matter what did. I leaned back, my hand still resting on his, and let my eyes close, not in despair, but in trust. The room felt full, not of answers, not of healing, but of Him. And that was finally enough. Morning light spilled gently through the blinds, casting thin gold lines across the hospital floor. I sat there quietly, my hand still resting on Eli's, watching him breathe. The world outside was waking up, nurses shifting between rooms, carts squeaking past in the hallway, the soft murmur of voices and footsteps returning. But in that room, time still felt suspended. Peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes like this, in quiet breaths, in unseen prayers, in the holy hush that follows surrender. I didn't know what would happen to Eli. I didn't know if the doctors would walk in with hope or a final decision. But somehow, that uncertainty no longer ruled me. My fear had been replaced by something deeper. Not knowledge, not control, presence. That's what He gave me. That's what He left behind. I looked at Eli's face, so still, so worn, and I remembered what Jesus had said. The ones who suffer deeply are not cursed, They are trusted. And even when the healing doesn't come the way we ask, the glory will. I found myself whispering without meaning to, words I didn't plan, but ones that rose from somewhere sacred. "You're one of them," I said to Eli softly. "One of the ones who carry heaven in silence." My voice cracked, but I kept going. "You never asked to be seen. You never needed to be praised. But you are known, and none of this is wasted." A tear slipped down my cheek, but it didn't carry grief. It carried reverence. I thought of all the people watching this now, the ones still aching, still asking why. The ones who held on to their faith with trembling hands, wondering if God even noticed. And I wish I could take you where He took me. I wish you could see what I saw. The crowns, the book, the echoes, the presence. But even if you don't know this, your tears are not forgotten. Your pain is not ignored. Your faith in the dark is more radiant than any sermon in the light. God is closer than you think, not just beside you, but within you. He weeps when you weep. He collects your sorrow like treasure. And He turns every scar into a seed of glory. So if you're still asking, still wondering, still waiting for the answer, maybe what you really need is not an explanation. Maybe what you need is Him. Because in the end, I didn't walk away with a theological blueprint. I walked away with a person, the person of Jesus. And His presence was the answer I didn't know I needed. If you've been carrying your pain in silence, hear this clearly. God sees you. God remembers you. And heaven is not far from the brokenhearted. It is built upon them. If this story stirred something in you, don't leave empty. Talk to Him. Right now. You don't need perfect words, just honesty. And if you've ever asked why in the middle of pain, know this. You are not alone, and you are not forgotten. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and filled with God's presence, subscribe, because He's not done speaking. And next time, it just might be your question He answers.